I have relatives in Israel, and I was fortunate enough to go visit them. And my aunt and uncle were founders of the state of Israel. They were there before when it was a British protectorate and helped found the state, and they worked on a kibbutz. And when I was there, we got into a lot of political discussions, as you might imagine, in that place. And my uncle had a great line. He said, you put 6 Israelis in a room and have them talk politics for a half an hour, and you're going to come out with 7 different political parties. So they'll attach to their own and then have some more. That's what educational discourse is all about. People love to trash teaching, learning, whatever, because they're experts, because of all of you have been in a classroom. Education's changed. Educators are a lot more prepared. Those at the university are taking on a lot more than just a content specialty. So when I talk about what a renorming of schooling is, it's just suggestive. And what I think would be most interesting and compelling would be a discussion afterward. So my hope for you is to recognize the complexity of what we're dealing with and be really, really suspicious of someone who says, I've got the plan. You do X, Y, Z, and 1, 2, 3 is going to happen. It doesn't. But some things happen with more probability than others. And that's where I hope this discussion will go. First, I'm wanting you to imagine it's a Sunday afternoon and you had something planned and it got canceled. You're all by yourself. You get to do what you want to do. Maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's a sport. I'm wanting you in your mind to go to that place. And you're having a ball, no interruptions. The phones, internet are magically dead. You there? You start this project and you think a half an hour has gone by, and you look at your watch and it's 3 hours. How many are there? It's learning. How many of you had that same feeling, had the same experience when you're in a classroom? Raise your hands. Fewer hands. I love the quote by Mark Twain, never let my schooling interfere with education. Why? Because we all have been trained to do 2 things. Give the right answer, psych out the teacher, so we can get the grade we want to get, so we can get our needs met, so you can get a degree, so you can get more money, and on and on and on. But we also have a native curiosity, and we'll let that native curiosity continue, and then time evaporates. How can we get that longer sense of time, deeper sense of time, to happen in the classroom? It's hard when you have 50-minute hours at the university. It's harder in schools when you have to have 20-minute shifts. Oh, we're doing reading now. Oh, take your reading book, put them away, now take your science books out. It's really disorienting for a kid who's really getting into something. So how can we structure a school day, the last 6 hours, of which we only have 4.5 hours that are usable, to allow that long-term time, that kairos time, that you just thought about for that Sunday afternoon as a way of teaching and learning? First, we have to look at what's behind schooling. One of my mentors, one of my heroes, a guy named John Goodlad. Goodlad has been talking about schools and talking about school transformation for years. He was at Emory, he was at UCLA, he was at UW in their, I think, education transformation program. And he has this great line from one of his books. Goals for schooling emerge through a social political process in which a certain set of interests prevail over others for a period of time. So then the question to ask is, what are the social political interests prevailing upon our schooling? Have they lived their useful time? And where would we go? What would be new social political processes. First, some context. I'm going to pass this out and pass them around. Where are we in our schooling? When I was growing up, and maybe when you were growing up, the United States had the #1 school system in the world. People at the university level would love to come here because we had the #1 university system in the world. You know, people have joined this global economy and they're catching up with us. Meanwhile, we're doing what we do best, allow anyone to come through our borders and then try to adapt at the schoolhouse. So how do we do all that stuff comprehensively and still do good test scores? There aren't many good comparisons, but there's one, the PISA, P-I-S-A, that looks at math scores. And if you look, they have them every 4 years. So the last PISA, I think, was 2010, and they looked, and you'll see this on the pencil graph, at where the United States fits with other countries and with other states. We used to be #1 regularly. We're not now. Who are the #1 countries? Taiwan, Hong Kong, Korea, Finland, and Switzerland are the top 5. This is for a proficiency test on math, a real hard test, where the highest country in the world is only 28%, but we are considerably lower. So how then can we get that proficiency up, dealing with all these people coming in our borders, dealing with huge challenges for revenue streams? This is a short history of education in the United States in the last 235 years. That social political process that was part of our forefathers and mothers was to do two things: basic skills and inculcate democracy. We had a need for people to do reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's especially pronounced when that reading, writing, and arithmetic needed to be in a tongue other than which they were born with. So that's what happened in the one-room schoolhouses. You taught the basic skills, and you taught what a democracy meant because people hadn't ever been in a democratic society before. Several generations later, we found a need to expand that original idea. Immigrants were coming into this country in droves. Now, how do we take those immigrants and what is it that's going to be driving our economy? A guy named Taylor was talking about how to make businesses more efficient, and we ended up morphing into what's now known as the comprehensive classroom, comprehensive curriculum. A little bit of something for everybody. You all know what I'm talking about. On one end, you have people who are in AP. Then you have a big group in the middle who are just trying to do the standards and get their high school degrees or whatnot. And then you have another group which is either remedial or it's tutorials, or maybe in some districts they just do vocational. By the way, there's also sports, there's also drama, there's also Key Club, the comprehensive school. At this time, the American notion of high school got developed. Advanced to the 1960s, to the time of Reagan. What was happening then? Huge challenges to our economic rank in the world. Business folks are saying, how can we be competitive? So schooling then became much more competitive. How? You all know. Testing. High-stakes testing saw its debut during that time. It's not a new concept. We just expanded it with No Child Left Behind. In 1983, a national report came out, A Nation at Risk. Oh, we're going down the toilet. We're not going to be able to compete internationally. We don't have mechanisms to help drive this new technological economy. What to do, what to do. Blame the teacher. And that's where it's been the last 30 years. So where we're moving is having too many spinning wheels, too many spinning plates at the end of a stick. And what's we're dealing with now is a huge emphasis on achievement. We're trying to eliminate poverty. That was the original notion of No Child Left Behind. Every child is worthy, every child can learn, we need to get to them. One missing piece, I forgot to tell you, we're not giving you money. Now, education in this country really does work, but it really depends on the zip code you live in. Bill Gates, Paul Allen and Bill Gates went to a school just north of here that graduates 100%, and every one of the people it graduates go to the university of their choice. Now, if you have $20,000 that you're not doing anything with, and you can give that per year to yourself, it works. But the average spent on any kid in public schools in this state at this time is $8,300. 83, 21. Do the math. So until we decide, new social political process, that we're going to fund No Child Left Behind, it ain't going to happen. What's the future look like? I'll be coming back to these, but these are things on the horizon that academics are talking about, hoping to get traction in the State House, hoping to get traction with the feds, which, by the way, this is interesting. Traditionally, the feds wanted to stay away from education. So they'll fund huge programs, breakfast programs and skill-based programs for kids, like reading. But less than 5% of a district's budget came from the feds. With the reauthorization bill in 2008, it doubled from 5% to 10%. And with this jobs bill that Obama's talking about right now, it'll go from 10% to 15%. Why? The states don't have the money. There's no more funding sources. So the feds are playing into education in huge ways, and no one really knows what the outcome of that. During the last 20, 25 years, they talked about standardizations. We had standardization of curriculum, standardization of preparation for students, standardization of everything when kids can go to the bathroom. We're talking now about customization. How do you customize an education that might be good for you, but not for you, so we'll do something different? We're talking about modular education. With technology, we can do that. You don't need experts in every building. You need to have access to experts for your students. They can go online to get that. Instruction which supports intrinsic motivation. Oh, academic words for student-centric. It used to be, here's the little adage, oh, I love this adage. You are the expert. So you're a sage on the stage, a sage on the stage. Oh, I'm here because the teacher's smart. We're moving from sage on the stage to guide on the side. Really what I am is an expert facilitator, helping you get your needs met, your needs met, and having a long-term IEP, individualized education plan, that is segmented to some things happen in a brick and mortar place, and some things happen online, and some things happen experientially. You look at the textbooks. What happens with all education? What are the goals, regardless of the social political processes? Four things keep coming up again and again and again. There's an academic function. So it's a literacy, the basic skills, the 3 R's, but it's also a cultural literacy. We're not just here for our head. So educators talk about the ABCs of school. Affective, behavioral, cognitive. So even though they're getting rid of cultural aspects in schools, art, music, PE, that's a function of our society. Vocational is making a big comeback right now, especially as people are tooling for new careers when they've been riffed. So career readiness, strengthening the work ethic. A lot of employers are saying, smart people are coming out of high school, but they don't know how to work a long period of time. Or they don't know how to team. Or they don't know how to think outside the box. If it's not, instructions aren't written, they don't know what to do. Schooling is an obvious place to do that. Economic responsibility. Have you ever heard of this term? credit card debt. Students are coming out of school. When I was teaching undergraduates, they get their first credit card. You're going to be a BA, and you're going to be really well employed and have lots of money. So let's start you early. I can use this at the bar on Friday night. Where do we teach economic responsibility? Where is the notion of our economic driver, stock, even taught? That should be a part of schooling. Also, a social civic function. We live in a complex society. How do we deal with that complex society? So there are issues of diversity. There are issues of geographic priorities. In one part of the country, they're different than another. The political priorities go from the federal to the state to the local, maybe even municipal. That needs to be taught. So few students graduating from high school could tell you what the difference is, who the leader is, at the federal, at the state, and at the municipal level. They don't know. You can say shame on the teachers, but unless there's a systematic plan from kindergarten to 12th grade that's not test-driven, why should they know? Then what do you do with people who come into schooling from a very different system, maybe a totalitarian system? How much are we doing the work that was done in the 1850s? Finally, there's the personal. This is making a big pitch right now. What does it mean to be personally fulfilled? i.e., what is your self-esteem and how does it matter? So we're doing psychology in the schools. Some are doing. We also have a notion in this country for lifelong learning. This is really, really revolutionary, folks. I had a student from Taiwan who said, I can't understand America. How does this work? You can be in school, leave and go work, and maybe tragedy happens and you lose your family or you lose your job and you can go back to school at any time and remake yourself? How does this work? It's a fabulous thing we have. Lifelong. Argosy wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the lifelong learners. We have so many non-traditional learners. Okay, now think about this just for a half second. We have all these things that we're supposed to do, and we only have 180 school days to do it. Less in many districts that can't afford it. When I was a student, we would have 2 or 3 textbooks, about 150, 180 pages. Now, in elementary school, you have 5 different textbooks, all 700 pages long. How do we do all that stuff with the time from another era that's given to us? That's all the stuff above board. There's a hidden agenda. Again, social political processes. Woodrow Wilson was the president of Princeton before he became president. And as the president of Princeton, his job would be to go to various schools and hustle for students to come to Princeton. And at one of his addresses, he talked about the hidden agenda of what is still going on in schools. There's one class of people who run things and a much larger class of people who do what the leaders tell them to do. All right. If we're going to do the front slide that said personal fulfillment and democracy, but we are going to be constrained, and we can only do a few things because we're going to lose our job because of it, is there some cognitive dissonance there? And do we support people who really do want to make those changes? No one talks about this. Why? Because really we're dealing with a social justice issue. Now you're going to see a slide coming up saying the number one most important thing we can do in educational reform is make effective teachers. Yeah, because it's the teacher talking to those 30 students or increasingly 40 students. Or that professor dealing with 200 students in a lecture room. Well, no, let's talk about UW now, 700. So the effectiveness of that teacher or professor translates into more effective students, higher achievement scores. The research says so. But if you take your lens back a little further, you'll see something called environment. What environment are producing those students who are in the classroom? And some very compelling and very consensual research suggests that only 15% of achievement is influenced by effective teaching. 60% is affected by where they put their head at night and what's going on in that environment. Sensitive teachers know and adapt to that. They have used resources that are now being eliminated. The social worker in the school, the psychologist in the school. Ed Psych was a huge field when I was coming through. And you'd usually have one psychologist per 200 kids, which is like one per building. Now you have one psychologist for 1,000 kids, and in some districts, 2,000. How does that work? What are you going to do? So we need to look at the holistic part of where a kid's coming from, their income, nutrition and health. Can not only the kid navigate in English, but their parents. Oh, where are we? These are recent scores that I could pull off from the web about what's going on here in Washington. The turquoise scores are high, the yellow scores are low. You can see what's happening by ethnic group. There has been great research from Harvard, amongst many, that we know how to get to low income and traditionally marginalized groups. And it doesn't just take money, it takes a particular skill set. It takes a particular sensitivity to culture. It takes consistency. Oh, I've been on so many grants where we're doing fabulous stuff, the grant period runs out, you have to find your own money. It takes at least 10 years. Our social political process committed to long-term change. We know what to do. The research is there. Are we committed to it? More scores. The dropouts are getting worse at the bottom end. There's a yawning gap between those who go to elite colleges, and by the way, more are going to college. 15 years ago, only 20% of high school graduates went on to get BAs. Now it's pushing 30%, 28%. By the way, more with women than men. They are seeing second careers or first careers. They're seeing success. However, there's a one-size-fits-all rubric in most colleges. So a lot of our students of color do not get the resources they need. I'm not talking about reading and writing labs. I'm talking about study skills. I'm talking about how you deal with independence in ways that you've never seen before. We know what to do. Can we fund it? Very quickly, I want to talk about a theory that I'm really fond of that has a lot of potential for success. It's not looking at either the kid only as the object of the research, the object of the intervention, or the teacher only. That's where research was in the 60s and the 70s. Beginning in the late 80s, we're looking at how to do change environmentally, and that is the child in the classroom. The child is located. There's a context there. You do a sociogram. Who are the kids' friends? Who won't they sit with, especially at the lunchroom table? Those are opportunities for change to do real life interventions about race, about culture, about teaming, about a whole host of things that now we just kind of ignore. I think the second bullet is really, really important. Next time you see pundits smashing teachers, ask if they've been in a recent classroom where 20% of them have mental health needs, 25% are living in poverty, and at least one person in that class has been a victim of abuse, probably that day. Now, go teach diphthongs. One of the things that they know is to create a seamless bridge between school and home. I'm not talking about, oh, take your nice little thing that you drew today and take it home to mama. We're seeing this on the internet where there's regular conversations between the teacher and the parent. One of the things that research is showing is when parents understand the language of schooling, that is to say, what teachers say to each other, they are a lot more supportive. This makes sense. Doctors give you the language of medicine, and they use medical terms. They use adult terms. A lawyer gives you the language of the law when they're trying your case. Teachers have been afraid to do that because we don't want to speak down to parents. No, you don't need to. Show them the language of learning. Show them what it is that you're doing. Well, we talk about differentiated instruction. Let me tell you what differentiated instruction means. Students who are influenced by early feedback from teachers become successful. You'll see another slide where it is explicit and regular feedback. I can only say as much as what I know with my students. One of the things that my students fear is scholarly writing. APA stuff. The fear comes from not knowing how to manipulate it. So I'm very, very specific with my comments. They probably gulp after the first assignment back, but with repeated assignments, they don't make the same mistakes. They make new mistakes. Progress. Students need direct instruction. That will be direct instruction for the academic side, the cognitive, but also direct instruction for the affective side. How to do teaming. Don't just put them in groups and say, okay, go to it. Show them how group process really works. Also for the affective side. If, God forbid, we can even talk about feelings. Direct instruction on that. Finally, we need to model what relationships can be. A lot of students either come from homes where there are no relationships or homes where there are negative relationships. Modeling that is really important. Ooh, I got to model it now with 40 students. Again, be careful of trashing teachers. And obviously we need parental support because what we have here is a place, an opportunity to take that challenge and become successful. If you look at this graph, on one side you have challenge, on the other side you have skill. For many students, they have low skills, but the challenges are high. Oh, we have to get through that 700-page text really fast. We have to teach to the test so we can have better scores. And we might go at a pace that's too fast for that kid. Or they're afraid to say that they're not getting it because they'll be perceived as dumb on the playground. Oh yeah, I get it. When the skill level is too low but the challenge is too high, you have anxiety. If you don't, any psychologist will say this, if you don't deal with the anxiety directly, you're not going to get to deeper learning. It'll be superficial. But that's only with our low economic students. At the other end, the Overlake Academy, where Bill Gates and Paul Allen went, we have the opposite. Well, not there, but in many classrooms near there, where there is high skill but low challenge. There's not the resources to engage these really bright students. So it's a yawner. My daughter, who has a phenomenal IQ, was really bored in school. And here I am, taking courses for my doctorate and getting a call from her teacher saying that she's being disruptive. What I want to say is, fix your class. But I didn't. More can be done to improve education by improving the effectiveness of teachers than by any other factor for which we have control when the environment is addressed appropriately. Let's look at what's going on in a day-to-day moment of a school teacher, of a professor. They're making decisions all the time. In the 1960s, they did a lot of time motion studies, and teachers were making as many as 250 decisions to well over 1,000 in any given 50-minute period. Think of that. What are you doing with your time? What goes into that decision making? Look at the top bars. Obviously, there's knowledge of subject matter. If you don't know that, you shouldn't be in the classroom. We test for that now to get folks who don't have decent subject matter out of the classroom. We also do the bar on the right pretty well, repertoire of teacher skills. So, purposeful teaching means, and then there's a whole array of things that you can do. We do that moderately well. We don't do the others very well. We don't look at the theoretical knowledge about learning and human behavior. What we do is have students memorize stuff for the test. But we don't engage in deep conversations about what does cognitive dissonance really mean? When you were thinking a certain way, and all of a sudden I make you really uncomfortable, and now that thinking that you had doesn't take in this new information. Oh, I don't want to upset these kids. Are you going to upset them later when they can't get a job? When an employer is going to ask the same thing? Or when they're asked to decode very complex political information before they make a decision in a democratic society? We need to give people practice at that. Finally, what are the attitudes that foster learning? I'll get to that in a moment. Fabulous research done by a guy from New Zealand named John Hyatt, who found out what those attitudes are. Because you can come in smart as a whip, really know your content, know different interesting things to do, and students will resist. You want me to do what? When? Because they don't like your attitude. They're right. John Hattie looked at over 800 studies of what makes for effective learning. He called it visible learning. I gotta see it, I gotta feel it, I gotta touch it. And he found these things. He found many things, but statistically, these were the highest. When students are appropriately challenged, when the teacher and the student are in a learning mode, success happens, regardless of grade level. When there's the deliberate practice of goal mastery and direct instruction, good things happen in school. Again, that could be for the A, B, or C, the affective, behavioral, or instructional. When there's explicit feedback, formative, which means ongoing, detailed evaluation, good things happen in the classroom. The biggest effect on student learning is when teachers became learners and students became their own teachers. Self-monitoring and self-regulation were the key. When the teacher says, you know, I'm a 54-year-old woman and I just started taking up the piano again. I stopped when I was 7. Oh, it's hard. Let me tell you where it is. And they go and they really mangle a tune. The students say, she's just like us. When there's strong parental expectations on the child and knowledge of the language of schooling, good things happen in school. When there's a safe, caring learning climate, which values making mistakes, good things happen in the school. You know, that's not quite the answer I wanted, Elizabeth. Does anyone else have another idea? Is not a way to support discovery. The real answer to educational reform is to keep the test and the accountability, but to make sure every school has a clear sense of mission, an outstanding principle, and an invigorating moral culture that hits you when you walk in the door. This came from a New York Times editorial by David Brooke, where he was responding to a woman named Diane Ravitch, who's one of our leading researchers out of Stanford, and she was in the Bush White House. She helped craft the particulars of No Child Left Behind, and she has since repudiated that and saying, I didn't really pay attention to the complexity of what was going on. So she was saying, get rid of accountability. Brooks is saying, no, keep the accountability, but expand what schooling can be. So I showed this particular quote to my daughter. My daughter didn't come through teacher education place. She went through Teach for America. She had a boot camp that lasted one summer, and they threw her into an inner city classroom in New Orleans. teach. And then they had mentors come in and did model lessons. They did cohorts. She's gotten to a place now where this 31-year-old woman is now dean of students at a high school. And when she looked at this quote, she said, "That nailed it, Dad. You got to feel that the school is for you. They're behind you. They got your back. If they don't, the students aren't going to give what they need to give." Now, the rest of it's hard work, and everyone has to be on the same page. I took the research from many different researchers, and here's some ingredients I'll go through really quickly about what's needed to get there, so you can feel it when you walk into the classroom, walk into a school. You need a vision, not a mission, a vision that's different than what isn't working now. You need to have it individualized, student-centric, tailored to the needs of the student. Number 3 is going to bust the way the package is now. There has to be sufficient time for the teachers and students to do work well. I don't know if that means we have to have a 240-day school year. I don't know if it means we have to have a 8-hour day. But in Asia and Europe, they go to school from 8 to 5. We still are going to school from 9 o'clock to 2:40. We have to ask ourselves, what are we hoping to get, and can we get it if the given structure? We need to have a conversation on what is student and teaching learning. What is quality? What are positive relationships in the learning exchange? And how do you create a culture that's positive, that's hopeful, that's exciting? There can be many venues for creating this culture. As I said, the ideas now are more modular, so you'll come to school part of the time. We're doing that in high schools now. Some kids leave for half the day and they go do some work. Some kids who maybe are an IB will go to another country for part of their learning. We're doing it now. We have to codify that. We need leadership that is not afraid of making a mistake, because you'll get fired. We need leadership that's willing to say to a teacher, what's working, what's not, what can I do, and then deliver it. Finally, the watchword of our times, data-driven decision-making, evidence-based decision-making, for sure, but please include a variety of data sets. Finally, we need to look at what trust is in a classroom, in a school, in a policy board. We need to have the support of parents, and we need to have multiple school designs, no longer one size fits all. So there's been this organization that happened in 2000 called Partnership for 21st Century, and in looking at and asking questions of district superintendents throughout the land, they said, what's needed for the next 20 years? They said those 4 things. Is that in the curriculum? Is that in the common standards? Usually not. Usually it's an overemphasis on content. But what are employers asking for? People who can team, think outside the box, be entrepreneurial. An article in the recent Atlantic Monthly talks about that. The cities that are growing in the next 20 years are cities that have a high social index and a high cognitive index. Think Silicon Valley, think Seattle. If we're really going to be serious about looking at the whole child, the whole school, we've got to get to the affective, something called SEL, social emotional learning. That can be framed in a way called mindfulness. Mindfulness helps kids manage their emotions, handle stress, resolve conflict in the moment it's happening. You teach kids how to do it. And then when they erupt, and they will, you say, you having a problem? You go over there, would you please handle them? And you go back to your lesson, because the kids have been trained. I showed this to be true. It was the topic of my dissertation. What's that inner compass that people can learn to help them really believe in self-esteem, not as, I really think I can, I really know I can. There's more to it than that. Learning what calmness is. So when you're in stress, you have mechanisms to go get calm, rather than using violence as the mechanism to get calm. Lots of benefits. A couple last quotes. Al is my hero. Not because he changed the way we look at our world, because he was curious to his last dying breath. I love this. I never teach my pupils. I only attempt to provide the conditions in which they can learn. If we're going to do a new social political process, we might start here with the vision. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and then go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have become alive. Schools are repositories of kids who have been warehoused. If we're going to change it, then we have to ask this question: what's authentic? What's real? What's now? That's it. Thank you.